Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are exploring a really fascinating, incredibly high-stakes period in history. We're talking about those intense pressure cooker years in India between 1939 and 1942. It's a time characterized by a literal ticking clock, where the outbreak of a global war just unilaterally drags India into the fray. And that sets off this massive chain reaction: political maneuvering, desperate negotiations, and eventually a massive uprising. We're going to stick strictly to the historical record today to understand exactly how a total diplomatic breakdown led directly to the famous Quit India movement.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to untangle this complex web in 5 parts. First, the World War II spark. Second, the failed compromises. Third, the Japanese threat. Fourth, the Quit India resolution. And finally, the significance of the movement.
All right, Section 1, the World War II spark, the global catalyst. Let's get right into it.
To really wrap our heads around the momentum of this era, we have to look at how wildly fast diplomatic relations just deteriorated. I mean, we're talking about a 3-year span here. It kicks off in October 1939 with mass resignations, it barrels through 2 major, completely failed diplomatic missions in 1940 and early 1942, and it culminates in mass resistance by August 1942. The speed at which the political center collapsed here is honestly staggering.
Right at the starting gun of the war, the political landscape was already deeply fractured. See, when the Viceroy declared that India was at war with Germany, he did it without even consulting the Indian National Congress. So in protest, Congress ministries resigned en masse in October 1939. But the Muslim League, they had a completely different reaction. They actually celebrated these resignations, formally marking it as a day of deliverance and thanksgiving. So right away, you have the major political factions operating on entirely different tracks.
Which brings us to Section 2, the failed compromises, desperate negotiations.
Now, the geopolitical stakes get raised significantly in 1940. The Muslim League passes a truly defining resolution. They formally demand the partition of the country, calling for the creation of autonomous states that would be known as Pakistan. This would include provinces like Punjab, the Northwest Frontier, Kashmir, Sindh, and Baluchistan. So suddenly, the British aren't just trying to negotiate for wartime support anymore. They're navigating completely diametrically opposed visions for the very future of the subcontinent. So, facing the pretty grim reality of the war in Europe, specifically, the fall of France, and the very real danger of Britain itself being occupied, Viceroy Lord Linlithgow makes what becomes known as the August Offer in 1940. It was a desperate attempt to seek a settlement. But despite a temporary softening in the Congress's stance, the offer just totally flopped. Congress rejected it outright, and the Muslim League didn't accept it either, mainly because it didn't give them a clear assurance for the establishment of Pakistan.
What's really fascinating about this specific face-to-face meeting is that by 1942, things had gotten so dire that Prime Minister Winston Churchill actually dispatched Sir Stafford Cripps to India to meet directly with Mahatma Gandhi. This was a high-profile, absolutely critical attempt to break the political deadlock, especially as enemy forces were literally closing in.
So, what was actually on the table during that meeting? Well, the Cripps Mission proposed a few key constitutional reforms. First, India would be given dominion status, but, and this is a big but, only after the war ended. Second, a constituent assembly would be set up to draft a new constitution. Crucially, though, any province that wasn't prepared to accept this new constitution would be allowed to just opt out and get its own separate dominion status. And finally, there would be provisions to protect racial and religious minorities.
But just like the August Offer, the Cripps Mission was an utter failure. It was rejected by almost all parties, but again, for vastly different reasons. Congress was like, no, we want immediate independence, not some vague promise for the future, and they insisted that defense be handed over to a national government right away. The Muslim League rejected it because the plan didn't explicitly grant the right of self-determination to Muslims or explicitly accept the creation of Pakistan. And on top of all that, groups like the Hindu Mahasabha feared the partition clause, while the Sikhs and princely states felt their interests just weren't being safeguarded. The deadlock was total. Nobody was budging.
Mahatma Gandhi perfectly summarized this intense disillusionment with the British offers. He famously described the Cripps proposals as a post-dated check on a failing bank. I mean, wow. The Indian leadership simply had absolutely no faith left in promises that were deferred to some uncertain post-war future, especially coming from an empire that honestly looked like it was struggling to even survive.
And that shifts things to Section 3, the Japanese threat, an imminent invasion.
This is the external catalyst that really poured gasoline on the diplomatic fire. By 1942, the war situation for the Allies was deeply, deeply discouraging.
The Japanese army had already attacked Burma and was advancing incredibly fast toward Assam. So the threat of a Japanese invasion wasn't just some theoretical worry anymore. It was an active, literal march right toward India's eastern frontiers. That ticking clock was getting overwhelmingly loud.
This advancing threat led Gandhi to a pretty striking strategic conclusion. He argued that the continued British presence wasn't actually protecting India, it was acting as bait. He famously observed, "The presence of British in India is an invitation to Japan to invade India." His solution to save the country? Immediate and complete British withdrawal. He essentially told them to just leave India in God's hands.
Which brings us to Section 4, Quit India Resolution, the final push.
Let's move to how this builds, because this movement didn't just happen overnight. It was formalized in stages. First, in July 1942, the Congress Working Committee met at Wardha and adopted the resolution demanding the British rule end immediately. Then, a few weeks later, on August 8, 1942, the All India Congress Committee met in Bombay and officially passed the Quit India Resolution. They proposed a massive, nonviolent mass struggle if immediate independence wasn't granted.
Addressing the delegates that night in Bombay, Gandhi delivered a speech with just absolute resolve. He told the crowd, "Here is a mantra, a short one. The mantra is, do or die. We shall either free India or die in the attempt." The stakes here were absolute. It was a call for complete, unwavering dedication to immediate freedom.
But the British government struck back instantly. I mean, before the movement could even formally begin, the early morning of August 9th saw a massive, sweeping crackdown. Gandhi and other major leaders were arrested and whisked away to unknown destinations, and Congress was immediately declared illegal. In response, complete, spontaneous chaos erupted nationwide. We're talking huge strikes and demonstrations, which were met with really harsh police retaliation. The public started attacking symbols of British authority, police stations, post offices, railways. In fact, in several major parts of the country, British authority just temporarily vanished entirely in the ensuing uprising.
All right, Section 5, Significance of the Movement, a Lasting Impact.
So, the crucial point is this. Even though the core leadership was imprisoned and the movement was met with incredibly ruthless brutality, its historical impact was completely irreversible. Three things really stand out here. First, mass participation. People from literally all sections of society joined in, completely defying violent suppressions like lathi charges. Second, nationalist depth. It showcased just an immense, undeniable capacity for collective struggle and sacrifice. And third, British realization. The uprising made it undeniably clear that the empire could no longer rule the subcontinent against the overwhelming wishes of its people. The whole dynamic of colonial rule was permanently broken.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to ponder. The British put down the Quit India movement with swift and severe force, right? They effectively crushed the physical uprising in the short term. But by forcing the entire nation to rise up in such spontaneous, uncontainable defiance, did that very act of ruthless suppression actually cement the end of the empire? Because history often shows us that sometimes defeating a rebellion on the ground is exactly what proves that your days in power are ultimately numbered. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this breakdown gave you a crystal clear understanding of this absolutely vital piece of history. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.